let's go ahead and get started with prepping our muslin for draping. So here I have about 1 yard of muslin that I will be using to drape my bodice design. I'm going to unfold my piece of muslin completely, and as you can see here, my edge is not completely straight, and what we want to do is we want to take this opportunity to straighten out our edges. And I'm going to go ahead and tear the edge to make it look like this one on the opposite side. To go ahead and take one layer of my muslin, and I'm going to grab my scissor and make a snip, and I'm going to tear the fabric. And the idea is we want this to go all the way to the opposite end of the fabric, and as you can see here, it didn't happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back in with my scissor and make another slit a little bit farther inside of the last one, and then I'm going to go ahead and tear it off all the way to the other end of the fabric. So this is what we'll have, is some scraps. You can go ahead and put those to the side or toss them, whatever you prefer. And now I'm going to go ahead and take my piece of muslin and take it over to my pressing station and give it a good press with lots of steam, because we want everything to be nice and flat. I'm back from pressing my fabric and making sure that it's nice and flat. We're going to go ahead and start plotting our measurements for each piece for our drape. So I've written them down on this little scrap piece of fabric, and I'm going to go ahead and measure down about 25 inches and take my pen and make a marking here. And I'm going to take my scissor and make a little snip and tear along that marking all the way clear across to the other side of the fabric. I'm going to mark 15 inches from the selvage edge, making little markings all the way down my piece of muslin here. And then we're going to go ahead and connect those markings all the way up and down our piece of muslin here. And then we're going to go ahead and take our scissors and cut all the way up this line. After you cut along the line, this creates the first piece for your bodice drape. I am going to take my ink pen and label this as my front. I'm going to go ahead and put this to the side for right now. Second, I'm going to go ahead and do this to the back bodice piece of muslin. Also, connect the lines and cut and label this as my back piece. Again, these are the same measurements as the front. And now I have both pieces here, and I'm going to create a quick little rectangle for the strap piece that I have to drape. If you have any extra pieces that you need, go ahead and measure those out and create them now. And now I have 3 pieces. I have my front, back, and my strap piece. Go ahead and press down any other edges that need to be flattened out, and then we can go ahead and start blocking our fabric. What I'm going to do is take my L ruler here, and I'm going to make sure that all of my corners are exactly 90 degrees and that they're matching with my L ruler here. This is a really great method for making sure that your fabric is perfectly on grain and that it's nice and squared off. You can technically skip this step and just go right into draping, but when you're first learning, you want to go ahead and just learn this step, because it is pretty crucial when you're first starting out. But what you're going to do is, if your edges are not quite matching up with the ruler, you want to go ahead and pull in the direction that you need to. Sometimes it can be kind of difficult to tell which direction that is, but in this instance, you just want to make sure that you're more or less aligned with the L ruler. Whether or not you choose to skip this step is up to you, but we want to learn the rules before we can break them. So now I'm going to start marking my guidelines. I'm going to measure down about 11.5 inches from the front piece of muslin here, and I'm going to make an indication here with my ink pen, and then I'm going to go ahead and take my L ruler and square a line clear across the piece of muslin, and then I'm going to mark a 1-inch guideline along the selvage edge like so. And so now we have the horizontal line, which is going to represent my bust line, and then the vertical line, which is going to represent our center front. I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing to the back piece, but we're going to omit the horizontal line on this side. I'm also going to be labeling my horizontal line as my bust line for the front piece and then making a center grain line on my rectangle piece. All I did was fold my rectangle in half, creased it, and then drew the line in with my ink pen. Go ahead and do this to any other pieces that you may have. And now we have all of our pieces ready with our guidelines, and we're going to go ahead and press under the 1 inch line that I had you mark along both front and back pieces, and then we can go ahead and start the draping process. First, going to start with putting a bust tape on my form, and I'm going to use my trim here and anchor it to the bust line from apex to apex like this. And I'm also going to place a pin at center front and making sure that it matches up with the center front line on my dress form. Then I'm going to do the same thing a little bit higher up with this strip of fabric, and it's the same idea. We're doing this so that the drape does not collapse between the bust. So next we are going to take our tape, and I'm going to tape off the lines from my design. You're pretty much going to just take the design in your head and plot it on the form itself. And as you can see here, I am doing my armhole, and now I am taping off the back of my bodice, and I'm going to break it off here at center back. And then I'm going to go ahead and indicate my waistline and the strap for my back bodice. Now you'll notice that my waistline is not sitting at natural waist on the form, it's a bit higher. And this is what it'll look like. The side seam is optional, you don't have to tape that off, but I went ahead and did it for the purposes of this tutorial. So I'm going to go ahead and take my front piece of muslin with the 1 inch line pressed down and the horizontal line, and I'm going to go ahead and line that up the center of my dress form, and making sure that the horizontal line is matching up to my bust tape here. I'm going to start to place pins going down center front like this, and then I'm going to anchor the horizontal line going straight across the bust line, as you can see here, making sure that it's not dipping down in any way, and just placing pins here. I did end up having to adjust my pins, so just keep that in mind. You may need to adjust. And yeah, so this is what it'll look like. And you'll see that we have excess on the top and on the bottom of the bust line, and here is what my center looks like pinned down. And I'm going to go ahead and start draping my first dart, which is my side bust dart. And I'm going to take some of the excess, and what you're going to do is just think of the shape of a dart and replicate that onto your form. And I'm going to use my horizontal line here going across the bust as the placement line for this dart. So I'm going to just start to pin it down and start to shape it, as you can see me doing here. Once you have the placement of your side bust dart, go ahead and secure it with more pins like I have here. I'm going to take this opportunity to go ahead and take my scissors and just cut off the excess below the waistline of my muslin. And then I'm going to make snips up to but not through the waistline, just to make sure that this is going to smooth out nice. Now, after doing that, I'm going to begin smoothing out the waistline on the side that is closest to center front, as you can see me doing here. I'm going to place pins along the waistline, and as you can see here, my waistline dart is starting to take shape a little bit better, and I can better see what the placement is going to be for this section of my front bodice. So now I'm just going to begin placing pins down the legs of the dart, and I'm just making sure that everything is nice and smooth and snug, but not too snug. You don't want to be yanking your muslin to get the shape of the dart, if that makes sense. So as you can see here, I'm just placing pins down the legs of the dart and making sure that everything is nice and smooth. I put more pins going down the side seam just to ensure that everything is nice and smooth, because the idea here is we don't want any weird puckers or pulls or anything like that. And is also, I have this extra fabric in my armhole, so I'm going to go ahead and just pin it together like this. And at this point, I went ahead and also trimmed off the excess muslin on my armhole and did some clips into the armhole. And here you can better see that excess that is in my armhole. And again, all I did was pin it together, and we're going to address this later on once we put this on paper. And this is what my drape looks like after smoothing out all the areas. And you can see that the tape is really effective because you can literally see through the muslin, so that way you can get a better idea of what it's looking like. So here I have both my darts draped. They look really nice and smooth, and the bodice is looking very fitted, which is exactly what you want. And in my case, since I'm doing a fitted dress, this is looking pretty good. And now we can go ahead and start marking up our drape. And I'm going to use my regular pencil here, making sure that it is nice and sharp. And I'm going to start with marking the vanishing point of my dart, or where the dart ends. And I'm only marking on one side of my muslin because that horizontal line is technically marking one side of my dart leg. You'll see better once we unfold this and take it off of the form, but I'm just marking with little dashed lines where the other side of the dart leg is, indicate where that ends at the side seam. On my second dart here, you can see that I am just marking one side of the dart leg along my pins, and it's really easy because all you have to do is mark along where your pins are going through the fabric, and it makes it, again, super duper easy. I am now marking the other side of my dart leg, again marking along the pins using my pencil and making sure that I am being as clear and accurate as I can. You can get a little bit messy depending on like what the situation is, but as long as you know which lines are correct, you'll be fine. And here I am just making a marking to indicate where the apex is on my dress form, and kind of making an indication of where the princess line is, and making a little notch mark at the princess line at the waist. Now I am tracing my side seam, and I'm going to go ahead and start marking my armhole with these little dots that you see me doing here. And I'm going to also make sure that I'm clearly indicating where the excess of the fabric is in my armhole, and where that begins and where that ends, because if you're not clear in marking this, it can get kind of confusing later on. But this is what the drape will look like once everything is smoothed out and marked. And make sure that you are marking your shoulder seam in conjunction with the seam line already on the dress form. So this is what everything will look like. And you can see here I clearly indicated my dart legs and where they end and where the waistline is. And yeah, this is what it'll look like once you are done. And again, making sure to mark your shoulder seam. And at this point, we are ready to remove this and move on to the back bodice, which is a little bit easier than the front. So go ahead and unpin your drape, making sure to keep the pins in your darts and in the little excess that you have in your armhole. Keep those intact still, and then you can go ahead and remove all of those other pins that you may need to take out, and just go ahead and look over your work and make sure that everything looks pretty good. And as you can see here, we're pretty solid, and we are ready to move on to our back. For the back bodice, I'm going to take my other piece of muslin with the 1 inch pressed under, and I'm going to line that up with center back and pin it down. And here I have quite a bit of excess, so I'm going to trim and snip into the waist, but not through it, obviously, and making sure that everything looks nice and smooth. And as you can see here, the bodice is taking shape already. I'm placing pins along the waistline all the way up to the side seam, and I'm going to also place pins down along the side seam, as you can see me doing here. And I'm going to trim away the excess fabric along the side seam, and I am readjusting my pins a little bit here because, again, you want it to be pretty snug and flush against the form, but not yanking or pulling your muslin either. And this is looking pretty good. I am marking the lines for my back bodice and making little dotted markings and making sure that I am indicating where that strap is going to enter the back bodice on the top edge. This will help with construction later on. And I'm going to now mark the side seam and mark the very top of the bodice, and continue working my way down the side seam, marking my waistline like so. And this is pretty much it for the back bodice. This is what it'll look like once you remove it from the form. And now I'm going to just quickly drape my extra shoulder strap piece that I have to do here. And the idea with pieces that aren't necessarily draped on a fold or on center front or back, you just want to make sure that that line is staying nice and vertical and straight up and down. And this will just make sure that you're draping on the correct grain, and it's just to continue being accurate in your draping. Just dotting along the lines here all the way down, and I'm also making sure that the bottom edge is very clearly indicated, just to make sure that it fits with my back bodice when we go to put this on paper and for construction, of course. And once you have all of your draped pieces, they are nice and flat. I actually gave mine a pressing, but not with too much steam. You just want to make sure that you're doing this with a hot iron so that everything is nice and flat and ready to put on paper. Stay tuned for the next part where we will be putting this on paper and creating our patterns. Thanks for watching.